All right, our focus for this session is an operational analysis of the Guipuzcoa campaign from September to October 1936. We're going to conduct a doctrinal examination looking at the mission, the execution, and of course, the strategic consequences of what was a pivotal early war offensive.
Now, all the information and cartography you're about to see has been sourced directly from the work of Colonel F.J. Victor Rodrigo's Batallas de la Guerra Civil project. So, what we're presenting here are his findings, which will allow us to really understand this operation as it was both planned and then actually carried out. Okay, here's our agenda. It's a standard 5-part structure. First up, we'll assess the initial situation and the forces involved. Then we'll dive into the actual order of operations. After that, we'll trace the execution of the advance step by step. Section 4 will analyze why the offensive was halted, and we'll wrap all up with a final analysis. All right, let's get started. First, we need to establish the baseline. We're looking at the state of the contending forces right before the main offensive kicked off in mid-September. And what you see here is a really stark contrast in readiness. On one side, the Republican forces, they were plagued by systemic problems. We're talking military disorganization, a serious lack of experienced commanders, and pretty inadequate equipment. On the other hand, the Nationalist columns were professionalizing at a rapid pace. They were becoming well-organized, well-disciplined units, and this gave them what can only be described as an overwhelming tactical advantage. And this diagram really illustrates that professionalization in action. See, right after the capture of San Sebastian, a major reorganization happened. The command structure was solidified under Lieutenant Colonel Los Arcos, Colonel Irureta-Gallena, and Alonso Vega. And just to give you a sense of scale, Los Arcos' column alone, well, it had the equivalent of 40 infantry companies plus supporting arms. We're talking nearly a division in strength. This was the force that was slated to execute the main effort. Okay, that sets the stage. Now, let's move to the core of the plan. This next section covers the formal order of operations issued on September 17th. This is the document that laid out the mission and the overall concept for the next phase of the campaign. This map here gives us the commander's intent at a glance. The objective? It's pretty straightforward. Secure the rest of Guipúzcoa and then push on towards Bilbao. But the key here is the concept. This was not going to be a simple frontal assault. No, this was a maneuver designed to envelop the enemy forces that were defending the Arola and Deva river valleys. So the mission was really twofold. First part, fully occupy the province of Guipúzcoa. And a key piece of that was securing the critical rail hub at Villarreal-Samaraga. The second part, continue the advance towards Bilbao. And the method for all this was classic envelopment. The main effort, the Esfuerzo Principal, was directed right along the Beasain-Vergara axis. The whole idea was to unhinge the entire defensive line from the south. So, how did they plan to do this? Well, the operation was broken down into 2 very distinct phases. Phase 1, occupy the Udarola River line. Simple enough. Phase 2, the subsequent advance all the way to the Deva River line. Now, as for tasking, Colonel Irureta-Gallena's column was assigned the northern coastal sector. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Los Arcos' much larger column, as we've discussed, was tasked with that main effort down in the south. Of course, an advance like this requires significant support to sustain it. This slide here outlines the command and control structure. You can see the main command post was set up in Tolosa. It also details the logistical plan, the nuts and bolts. We've got supply depots at Tolosa, Andoan, and Vizcaya, ready to push munitions and provisions forward. All right, so that's the plan. Now let's turn to the execution. In this section, we're going to track the operational timeline, starting from the launch of the offensive on September 15th, right through to its formal suspension in early October. And as you can see from the timeline, the pace was rapid. Phase 1, securing the Arola line, that was done in about a week. Then, critically, on September 21st, you have Alonso Vega's column advancing from the south. They secure the Artlabon Pass, and that really threatens the Republican flank. This action precipitated a very rapid advance to the Deva River line. That line was reached by October 6th, just before the offensive was formally halted on the 12th. These 2 maps really help visualize the progress. The one on the left shows the situation on September 21st, right after the Phase 1 objectives were achieved. Now, look at the one on the right. That's the final front line just a couple of weeks later, on October 6th. You can see the advance was incredibly swift. It completely collapsed the defense across the front and pushed deep into the province, right up to the gates of Vizcaya. So this brings us to a pretty critical question. Why was an operation that had so much momentum suddenly stopped in its tracks? This next section is going to analyze the factors behind that very decision. I mean, think about it. Why halt an offensive that was so clearly succeeding? Well, the answer isn't a simple one. It's not purely military. It's actually a complex intersection of factors, some on the battlefield and others happening far beyond it. And as this map sort of indicates, the decision to halt involved a whole range of pressures. Yes, you had hardening enemy resistance, but you also had high-level strategic priorities pulling resources elsewhere. You had major political developments, like the declaration of Basque autonomy, and you even had international concerns factoring into the equation. So let's break these factors down a bit. First, the military picture. Republican resistance stiffened, and it stiffened significantly as they fell back on the main defenses of Vizcaya. You also had the arrival of the Republican fleet, which boosted morale and showed Madrid's commitment. Politically, the granting of the Basque Statute of Autonomy absolutely galvanized the defenders. But the truly crucial point was strategic. The Nationalist High Command had other priorities. They were focused on the sieges of Oviedo and, of course, the main advance on Madrid. Pushing for Bilbao just wasn't the top priority. And finally, there was a real political fear in nationalist circles about a potential international intervention.
Okay, let's move to our final analysis. What were the tangible results of this campaign? And what are the key operational takeaways we should be thinking about?
Well, the strategic gains were, to put it simply, immense. The single most significant outcome was the capture of the entire French border. This completely isolated the Republican-held northern zone from any overland supply or reinforcement. It was a devastating strategic blow, one from which the Northern Front would, frankly, never fully recover.
If we're looking at the numbers, the campaign secured nearly 2,000 square kilometers of territory. But we all know this isn't just about square kilometers. This wasn't empty land. We're talking about a densely populated, highly industrialized region. Its loss deprived the Republic of absolutely critical war-making resources.
And tactically, this campaign was a crucible. It really forged those initial volunteer columns, which started as pretty loose groups of partisans, into the disciplined, effective fighting formations that would go on to become the famed Navarre brigades. This is where they honed their tactics. We're talking about the effective use of mountain artillery and maneuver warfare, tactics which proved decisive for the rest of the war in the north. And so this leaves us with a forward-looking question, something for strategic consideration. With the front line now stabilized along the Deva River, both sides are facing a winter pause. The question is, how would this operational halt be used? How would they rest, refit, and reorganize their forces? And maybe more importantly, how would this pause shape the strategic plans for the big spring campaign of 1937?
That concludes this operational briefing. Now, for a more exhaustive study of this campaign, one that includes detailed orders of battle and primary source documentation, we once again direct you to the project source at batallasguerracivil.es. Thank you for your attention.